Thank you, Maggie. All right, I hope everyone can hear me. So yeah, thanks for everyone for coming. So this next section, I'm going to be going through the portion of the data sets, and particularly the city attorney data set that focused in on the criminalization of sex work, or kind of as it was categorized, prostitution-related crimes. And so this was part of the report that I worked on when we worked on this report last fall. So just to give kind of a quick overview of how I'm going to approach this, I'm kind of going to touch briefly on why we chose this topic and why we decided to focus on this report. Then a little bit on our methodology. I'll give a quick kind of overview of kind of the trends that we saw in the data more generally, and then I'm going to really focus in on kind of specific analyses based on the kind of specific criteria of kind of things we've been talking about: race, gender, location, and then also kind of case filing decisions. Cool. So in terms of kind of why we decided to focus in on this topic, I think first it was definitely I don't know, kind of there was a high number of prostitution-related crimes in both of the data sets. It wasn't the most significant kind of grouping, but it definitely it stood out as a pretty big category, and specifically one that had a lot of different types of charges, very different charges, and so that's something I'll be talking about. And then the other reason was kind of in our initial, research, when we were trying to figure out, what areas of criminalization we wanted to focus on, because there's, like we've been talking about, there's a lot of different ways you can focus in on this. We had an interview with the Los Angeles public defender, and the criminalization of prostitution was brought up kind of not only as a really big problem, but kind of an area where additional research and data could be of value. And so that kind of helped us guide us in this direction. And so in terms of methodology, Simon kind of, and Simon went over this pretty well. So pretty much it was just, we created one big category of kind of all the different prostitution or sex work related crimes. And pretty much we made different subsets and labeled them pretty much according to the different types of charges that we saw. There's about 9 different charges, like I'll touch on in a moment. So here, you see on the slide, this is kind of the general overview. In terms of the total number of charges, there was a little over 8,000, and this is again focusing on the city attorney data set, which is a little bit larger, so that's why we're looking on that. And that's over a period of about a little over 2.5 years, from January 2017 to September 2019. So this was made about 5% of the total number of charges in the data set. And so when you look at that kind of average like that out monthly for a period of 2.5 years, it comes out to about 244 charges a month, which is really, which is really disturbing. I mean, LA is a big county, but I find that really, really disturbing. Regarding the type of penalty, right, we talked about the differences between misdemeanors and infractions. So almost all of these charges are misdemeanors. And kind of they're all, important to note kind of the source where they come from. These almost all come from the state penal code, which is valuable kind of when you're thinking about power mapping and kind of where to concentrate your advocacy efforts. 8 of the 9 charges came from the state, and only 1 of them came from the LA Penal Code, and it was one that had very minimal number of charges. So in terms of kind of the different types of charges, there were 9 different ones. But I'm really going to focus in on 3 of them. You can kind of see them there on the most common charges at the bottom of the slide. That's California Penal Code 647B1. So this is like the primary charge that criminalizes sex work, pretty much criminalizes individuals who engage in prostitution or sex work in exchange for compensation. And then you have 647B2, that's criminalizing individuals who are purchasing prostitution-related services. And then the third most common charge is loitering with intent to prostitute, California Penal Code Section 153.22. And this criminalizes loitering with intent to prostitute. This was another one of the most common charges. And if it sounds kind of vague and ripe for discriminatory enforcement, it is. And so that was kind of one of the big takeaways from this. From the research, and it shows up in almost every criteria we're going to apply. That charge stands out in just a whole bunch of different ways. So that's kind of just a rough overview of kind of the general takeaways. Perfect. And this next part, I'm going to look at what we found for location. Yeah, so the first thing you see here, is definitely the vast majority of sex work related charges. We see them in Van Nuys, North Hollywood, South LA, Central LA. And thanks to Simon, very talented Simon, we broke this down by council district. And so we can see here that Council District 6, which is Nuri Martinez's district, had by far the most charges, about 3 times, I believe, more than any other district. So really stood out. And I think this is, right, it's notable, not, right, she's council president, but also because she is a member who's made combating sex trafficking, right, a priority, from my understanding. And so, I don't know, I think this data kind of showing that, the criminalization of sex work is really significant in our district, could be valuable kind of in future efforts to try and minimize the impacts that anti-trafficking efforts have upon sex workers themselves, which I don't know, which is definitely a big problem. And yeah, so you also see kind of other districts, Council District 8, Council District 10, Council District 13, were other districts with high levels of criminalization. That is, let's say the names, Harris Dawson's district, or Weston's district, in Mitch O'Farrell's district. And so yeah, I also tried to kind of break down each individual charge by location, but there weren't really any significant discrepancies based on location when you looked at each individual charge. They were all pretty consistent in where they were located. Next, perfect. Oh yeah, then this you can see here. Not only are can you concentrate the charges by district, but you can see that they really are concentrated on certain streets as well. Here you have, Sepulveda, Western, and Figueroa. And so this kind of, I don't know, the location tracking and the geocoding here is, I feel like, is one of the most valuable parts of this report. Okay, next slide. Okay, yeah, so the next slide, yeah, we're gonna be kind of breaking down the charges by gender. And, again, kind of before diving in, it's important to note that, the data we got from, in this case, it was from the city attorney's office, the one I'm looking at, categorized gender as, M and F, male and female. And so, I'll talk about it later on, but, we have no idea how trans sex workers were categorized, which kind of is particularly important because we know that transgender sex workers, experience really high degrees of discrimination and targeting by police. And so I think it's really one of the areas that this data kind of is most complete, particularly when we're looking at sex work related charges. Yeah, and so yeah, so that'll kind of keep coming up because there's some discrepancies that you can just, I don't know, that don't make a lot of sense. And so yeah, so kind of overall though, overall, if you look at all the different charges across the categories, you can see the gender breakdown between male and female is categorized is relatively even. 56% of charges were brought against individuals categorized as female, and then about 43% against individuals categorized as male. And so, right, so you have this relatively even gender breakdown, but then when you look at the 3 most common charges, right, criminalizing sex work, criminalizing individuals purchasing prostitution services, and then criminalizing loitering with intent to prostitute, you see really enormous discrepancies. Almost, right, for almost 90% of the charges for 647B1, which is engaging in sex work, were brought against individuals categorized as female, right? So that's up from 56% to 90%. So that's, beyond significant. And then 97% of the charges for paying for prostitution-related services were brought against individuals categorized as male. So you have these really, clear, significant discrepancies in who buys and who engages in prostitution and sex work. And lastly, you see 67%, right, of charges of loitering with intent to prostitute, that's 653.22A, were brought against individuals categorized as female. And so I think some of the big takeaways, obviously that gender disparities are very dependent on the type of charge, right? With individuals categorized as female making up all the charges against sex work, and the opposite for individuals categorized as male. But I think, right, it's important to note that, right, this does not mean that the economic or social impacts of criminalization, is equal across the gender categories that we're given here. As it's very intuitive, if you criminalize prostitution, it has a far greater impact on people, offering rather than buying these services, where, I don't know, where that is your livelihood, that is your economic base. And so kind of from that perspective, it really seems that, criminalization of sex work really disproportionately impacts individuals categorized as female, who made up almost all of the charges of 647b1, and then a much higher portion of loitering with intent to prostitute oneself. And then, yeah, lastly, you know, again, there's a lot of uncertainty as to how trans sex workers were categorized by police officers. You know, I think there's a strong possibility that a lot of trans women may have been categorized as male, placed in the category of male by police officers, whether it's based on identification documents or just assumptions on how someone looks. And so in that case, you know, individuals categorized as male would be even more overrepresented in this data set. And so, but again, you know, this is something we do not know. So that is speculation. Yeah, definitely want to acknowledge that. Yeah, next slide. Okay. So you know, this again, as Simon and Maggie both mentioned, you know, there were only so many kind of categories by race. In this case, the 4 categories that made up almost all of these charges were Asian, Black, white, and Hispanic. So we saw about 38% of prostitution-related charges brought against Black people, 34% brought against Hispanics, 9% brought against whites, and then 2% brought against individuals categorized as Asian. So obviously this, several really big things stand out. You know, one of the biggest is that, you know, Black people are significantly disproportionately represented here. You know, that's about, 37% of prostitution-related charges. That is up from, I believe it's 23% of the total city attorney data set, which is already kind of an enormous increase from the proportion of LA's general population, which I think Maggie mentioned 9 or 10%. So that's, from 9 to 10%, up to 23%, and then up to 37% for prostitution and sex work-related crimes. But then if you look even closer, you know, you see that Black people are disproportionately impacted in those charges that specifically criminalize sex work, rather than those purchasing. And so you see that number jump up from 37% up to 51% of charges criminalizing sex work, 647b1, and then that number jumps up to 56% of loitering with intent to prostitute, which you know, which is really significant. We're going to come back to that, right? So again, 23% in the city attorney data set, up to 37% for prostitution-related crimes more generally, and then up to 56% for the specific charge of loitering with intent to prostitute, which again, very vague, very ripe for discriminatory enforcement. Yeah, so that's all. These are obviously really important to think about when you when considering kind of who's impacted by the criminalization of sex work. And also kind of like gender shows, you know, the racial discrepancies really depending on the type of charge, particularly whether it's buying or selling sexual services. Next slide. Okay, thank you, Maggie. And then, yeah, so for case filing decisions, you know, Maggie and Simon kind of touched on this, and, you know, I want to kind of go over this because I think it's relevant, again, to the policy recommendation that came up in the end. So I think, yeah, one of the really cool parts about the city attorney data is that it showed kind of the actions on these charges, which results in custody, people being released, which misdemeanors were rejected entirely, and then kind of importantly, why they were rejected. And so we see here that, yeah, for the most part, case filing decisions were kind of consistent across each charge, you know, charges resulted in similar outcomes. But again, one charge stood out, and that I really want to emphasize, that is, again, 653.22, loitering with intent to prostitute. So this charge, you know, again, which on its face leaves a lot of room for selective enforcement, this charge was rejected due to lack of sufficient evidence more than any other charge, which I think, right, provides a lot of value for future advocacy efforts, you know, in showing not only kind of which charge, I don't know, showing these charges is ripe for selective enforcement, but it's also arguably not even enforceable because the city attorney's office is rejecting this charge more than any other charge purely because it's largely based on an officer's discretion. And yeah. Yeah, next, final slide. Cool, thank you, Maggie. Yeah, so kind of the general takeaways from the data on the criminalization of sex work in the city attorney's data set. Definitely the first one is this is a huge issue of racial justice. You know, I don't want to say even more than some of these other areas of criminalization, but statistically, the disproportion of Black individuals went up even higher. And so to say prostitution criminalization disproportionately impacts Black people is a huge understatement. Right, Black people made up 37% of prostitution-related charges, up from 24% of the data set. And then when you look at the data kind of on race and gender together, you see a kind of a shockingly disproportionate impact specifically on Black female sex workers. Right, so for Black individuals, right, that percentage was 37%. We saw it rise to 51% for specifically charges against sex work. For women, who made up 56% of prostitution-related charges, that increased to 89%. So for both Black individuals and individuals categorized as female, we saw percentages skyrocket specifically for crimes for engaging in prostitution rather than purchasing. And again, this could be even higher for individuals categorized as female, depending on how trans sex workers are being categorized by police officers. And then kind of lastly, and which I've been touching on, is the other big takeaway is the potential for discriminatory and selective enforcement for certain charges, and specifically for loitering with intent to prostitute, 653.22a. And this is indicated, for several reasons. First, just in terms of background, these types of loitering with intent laws, that give police officers, a lot of room to kind of bring their own conceptions of, who looks like someone who's prostituting themselves. They face those challenges in California and other jurisdictions. Kind of at the heart of these claims, is the reality that giving loitering with intent laws really incentivize discriminatory police enforcement, particularly against women of color and trans women. And so, yeah, so that's something that really stands out, and that's important background. And then yeah, you can even see kind of room for selective enforcement in the way the charge is phrased in the statute. The language is vague. The language does not kind of prohibit officers from considering certain factors, such as the way someone is dressed, which is something which has been litigated in other jurisdictions based on its kind of discriminatory application. And then lastly, right? So you're talking about a charge that's phrased as loitering with intent to prostitute. That gives officers a lot of discretion, and so it's really significant to note that this was a charge that Black individuals made up the highest percentage of, at 56%, right up from, again, 24% of the data set, 37% of the prostitution-related crimes, and now it jumps up to 56% for Black individuals. And so I think the fact that Black individuals are being charged with this crime more than any other really significant when you're showing how problematic this portion of the penal code is. And so I think if we had to give one policy recommendation, obviously decriminalization in general is the goal, and this is what we built this report for. But I don't know, if it had to be one kind of specific recommendation for this report, is that this specific charge would be a priority repeal, and that could be from a number of different angles, including just the pure discrimination and racism, or just the fact that it's, the city attorney's office is just deeming it unenforceable. They're like, what do you, it's being rejected more than any other charge. And so that's, yeah, all right, that's all I have. So I think we wanted to open it up to questions if that's possible. And thank you everyone for coming. This is, really important issue, both the segment on criminalization of sex work and just the criminalization in general. And so we hope that this, this data will be value for advocates, who can use this to kind of boost their policy arguments and efforts, and then really kind of help strategize as to which laws are most damaging and which have most potential for legal or statutory challenges. We've really only touched the surface, so we're hoping this can be really used by other people to dive in even deeper than we did. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys very much. So interesting. And I'm so glad that you included in several points to talk about the municipal code, because there was some actions by activists a while back to look at exactly, the penal code, the municipal code, for criminalization of prostitution in Los Angeles for, a possible ballot issue, since it's not even being enforced, like you said, you know, get rid of the low-hanging fruit, but also some of these statutes that are just really doing a lot of damage to, you know, specific populations. You know, the goal here is not to arrest more white people for the same statute and therefore to look like the police are not as, and the city attorney is not, you know, not as discriminating as they actually are, not as racist as they actually are. But, you know, the fact and historically that a lot of these misdemeanor charges, you know, have their roots in white supremacy, that they were made to enforce, you know, white supremacy on people of color. So, you know, they're doing, this report shows that they're doing exactly what they were designed to do, that to criminalize people of color for any little thing that they can. And so all these statutes just need to be repealed across the board, in my opinion. And one big, large crime omnibus bill, they need to go. And I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to hear about some of the data and to see it. You know, here it is. We all have known about, you know, that these laws were primarily being enforced upon people of color, but you know, to actually see it in writing is just a real gift. And I really want to appreciate all your efforts in making this report happen.